Recording in progress.
You know, a little noticing, just like, but he did match the bobbin thread color. Yeah, okay.
All right, welcome everyone to our City Council study session for November 25th. Great to have you here with us. Turn it over to our City Administrator, Allison Zelms, to kick us off.
Thank you, Council President, council members, Mayor Norton, members of the public here today. We are going to start the meeting off with an update on the 2024 National Community Survey results. I believe online we have Brandon Barnett from Polco, which is the company that had administered this, available to walk us through the high-level overview. There's a lot of information also with a lot of detail in your packet, available online as well. And before I turn it over to Brandon, I was hoping to just thank Jenna Bowman and Jessica Schuler. Both of them were very instrumental in making sure that this got done and providing a lot of information on the city side and support in order to make sure we had the results available on time and coming to you for the 2024 National Community Survey. So with that, I will hope that Mr. Barnett is online, and if not, we will
It does look like he is online, but I think he needs to be switched over to be a panelist.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Mr. Barnett?
He's talking, but it's not working.
Can you guys hear me now?
No.
We are getting our tech issues figured out, so we got you switched over to being a panelist.
All right. Can you guys hear me now?
We still can't hear.
How about now?
We hear it through our clerk's computer. Give us 1 second, Mr. Barnett.
Sure.
Mr. Barnett, would you say something again?
Sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Nope.
Yeah, I would just maybe suggest if we can't get it figured out, we could reschedule it for January. There's no urgency to this particular topic. Maybe just give it another minute.
Okay with administration?
I mean, it's really up to the city council.
Okay, Mr. Barnett, we're going to give just another minute while our clerk goes and checks with our tech team, but otherwise we will look to reschedule in January.
Okay.
Councilmember Carlson, could we just move it down on the agenda? Because we have 4 items.
I would imagine Mr. Barnett made this time specifically to be available, so I would not assume that he is available otherwise.
Well, maybe someone could ask him. Right.
I think the people who have access to that are trying to make him available right now. He is able to be heard on YouTube, so that's not helping us here.
I can through my laptop if that helps. Not going through the system.
Right, but we won't have a recording in the system of it then.
Well, it sounds like it is being picked up when he talks because the subtitles are coming up.
Yeah, Your Honor, I also don't know how well he would hear you for any back and
Right.
forth questions you might
Sure,
have. It
that-
seems like it could be a struggle. but-
I can hear you guys just fine for what it's worth.
Okay, can you try one more time, Mr. Barnett?
Sure. Can you guys hear me now? Is this any better?
Well, you have a lot of information in your packet and we will work to reschedule.
All right, so sorry to
Apologies.
waste your time today, Mr. Barnett, but we really appreciate the work you've done and the council looks forward to hearing from you at a later date, and our staff will work with you to get you on the schedule soon.
All right, thank you.
Well, the next item that's on the agenda is someone who's here in person, I believe. So I hope.
Yes, he's right there.
Planning to succeed comprehend, oh, he wasn't sitting at the table, so I was struggling. Planning to succeed comprehensive plan, 5-year update, and Elliot Mueller is here to present. There are some other teammates also here if he needs to phone a friend, but I think he'll be fine. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mueller.
Awesome. Thank you. Afternoon, Council President Carlson, Mayor Norton, members of the City Council. My name is Elliot Moeller with Rochester Community Development, and I am here today to just give you a quick progress report on the work that we've been doing with the Comprehensive Plan 5-year update. As you may recall, back in February and March, city teammates had come before you to give presentation on the comp plan and what we had proposed for the update, as well as the growth management map and how we're going to update that, as well as industrial land inventory. And so all those 3 items will be approved in tandem, hopefully, in 2025. And then in May, the request for proposal was sent out, and then in June, we awarded it to Bolton and Mank. Let's see if this works. All right. So just a quick overview of the presentation today. I'll be reiterating the purpose of the comprehensive plan, going over the scope of work associated with the update, looking at our public engagement strategy, and then giving you that progress update, and then following through with our next steps. So in 2018, the comprehensive plan was adopted specifically to enhance the relationship between land use and transportation network, to design the urban environment to benefit the livability of Rochester's neighborhoods, and to strategize infrastructure spending for current and future growth. And the way we were going to achieve those 3 items was through the core principles that are on your screen right now. And I'm not going to read them all, but they vary from integration of land use and transportation systems to maintaining commitment to health, wellness, and in the environment, as well as championing social equity and the environmental justice. So community development teammates devised a plan for the update, which included a scope of work with 5 items. We wanted Bolton and Mank to review the industrial land and land inside and outside the city limits to find the area that would be best suited for that style of development. Looking at our residential and mixed use development, specifically residential land use, to ensure that we have adequate housing or land for housing to meet our current needs as well as our future needs. And then looking at emerging forces and trends, specifically after the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of changes in where people want to live, how they work, how they interact with everybody, as well as uptick in short-term rentals, and really trying to figure out how does that impact us today and moving forward. We also want to do a priority evaluation to ensure that where we're going today is in line with our core principles. And then lastly, to update the data associated with the plan. So that would include maps, figures, graphs, and the like. And we just really want to make sure that what's in the plan is reflective of the community today. And all of that will be encapsulated in a new user-friendly document. The current plan is very dense. It's very technical. It's not easy to read for our average resident. Even sometimes I have difficulty with it. That's just how much technical information is inside of it. But we hope to create a more concise, user-friendly version. And then the existing one would be in the appendix with all the data analysis that has been done previously. Next slide. All right. So then on your screen now is the proposed timeline that Bolton and Mank had provided us. You're looking at from when they were awarded the contract to when we hope to have the plan adopted, which would be June and July of 2025. Currently, Bolton and Mank has done outstanding job at collecting data and working with various city teammates to update those maps, graphs, and charts, as well as reading through all of the city's current plans and studies. You'll see on this next slide, well, for right now, we're about half or a third of the way through the proposed update. And then on the next slide, I believe I have a full list of those plans. Oh, I lied. So we're going to go through our public engagement strategy. So we really wanted to maintain the inform and consult. That would be on the IAP2 public participation spectrum, mainly because this is a update and not an overhaul of the plan. So we really feel that the thoughts of the public have been encapsulated in those core principles and they're still relevant today. So we decided to create a project website and social media posts throughout the process to update the community, as well as show them that they can access this project website, which are some screenshots on your right hand side there. At the end of this process, we'll have a video created by our communications teammates to look at all the changes that were made, and that will be available to the public through a social media post as well. And the next part of our engagement strategy was to consult stakeholders, which will be on the next slide. I apologize, the clicker kind of, I think, died. So it would be to consult stakeholders. Just recently, we had a steering committee workshop, which involved city teammates from community development, public works, our communications team and transit, as well as Bolton and Mank staff and partner organizations, most specifically our colleagues over at the county. And we used that time to ensure that Bolton and Mank was on the right track, where we wanted to see this update go, and for them to give us feedback on some of the ideas that we had for this update. So residential land analysis and, thank you, and industrial land analysis. On December 11th, we'll have an external stakeholder meeting, and this will be focused on that industrial land inventory. And we'd be working primarily with folks at RAB, READY, and the Chamber to discuss what they're seeing on the economic side of things, on the development side of things, and get their opinions on where we should, have that development go. I think this one doesn't work either.
I think you need to point it that way.
False way. Okay, thank you. Next slide. All right, so then this is the list of the audited plans, and this is not exhaustive. This is just to give you an idea of all the plans that they read through and they dissected and they pulled out key themes. 3 of them will be updated and will be included. Those are the Olmsted County Housing Study, or the Maxfield Study that the Housing Coalition is working on, the ROCOG Metropolitan Transportation Plan, as well as the Mayor's Vision 2050. So once those 3 are completed, Bolton and Mank will read through them, categorize data, and then add it into the comp plan. Next slide, please. So out of all those plans, they found 6 key themes, and I will say that they commended city teammates as well as our elected officials and leadership, because our plans are very consistent with each other. They found these 6 themes, and if you read any plan, you'll find some iteration of them. So that's, the diversification of transportation options, expansion of access to amenities, placemaking, increasing housing diversity, fiscal responsibility, and health in all policies. So again, you can read through any of those plans and you'll find some version of that theme. Next slide, please. Out of that steering committee workshop that we had done, Bolton and Mank took all of our comments and created 2 recommendations for things that we don't have in the comp plan currently. The first would be a development constraints map. That would basically be taking our current vacant land model and overlaying environmental constraints on top of it. And so we could more easily see on a map where we could easily develop on the land that we have available and where we could develop, but that constraints would be prohibitive potentially for financial or environmental reasons. And that would be a public-facing document for developers as well. The other recommendation was an equity analysis map, and that would be at the census block level data, or it would be census block level data of the whole city, looking at key populations such as the ones on your screen. And I'm not too familiar with how this works, but they are going to present to us more on what this would mean for assisting us with policy decisions moving forward.
Mr. Mueller, can I ask a quick question about the development constraints map? Is that for our area within our growth management as well, or just within existing city limits?
Yeah, so right now I think it's going to be for inside city limits, but I think we can have them expand it to our growth management area as well. Next slide, please. And then moving forward with next steps, you'll see this just very easy. This is on our project website, the timeline. So we have that external stakeholder meeting happening in December. And then we plan to come back to City Council for another study session to provide another update in February or March. And then that social media video in June or July, and then ultimate adoption of the plan update in July. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, that was my information I have for you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Any questions? Mayor Norton?
I noticed in there you said you would be awaiting the results of the Rochester Vision 2050, and that is now complete. So the question I have is, who do we send that information to? And it's I want to say a website. So it will be a link to all the documentation for a person or persons with.
Yeah, if it's
consultant.
available, I
It
can
is.
send it off, or we can work together with your department to send it off to Bolton and Mink.
Okay,
And
yeah,
then-
and we're not ready to release the data publicly yet, but for the purposes of planning, we felt it was going to be important for you to get it early, so we have that
Okay.
for you. And I will say, with your key issues, which page that was on, the key themes, I would say we have found one that's additional that one could argue may or may not be in the realm of the city government, but some of the rest of it does mirror what the community is saying, particularly housing diversification and diversity. Certainly we heard fiscal responsibility and expanding access to amenities were very strong leaders in that information, and we're just starting to look through it ourselves. But it makes me happy at least to see some of the main areas overlapped, and hopefully you'll take a peek at what we found on some of those that kind of surprised us and give us feedback afterward as well.
Sure, thank you.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you guys going through this. And it's good to see this getting started. We're a little late, but I think that's okay. It's not that timely. I wanted to make a statement here just to make sure everyone knows this, but when this was approved, there was nobody on this council that was on the council yet. This is sort of that like comprehensive plan with the idea of long-range planning, but it's also to maintain some consistency across councils, even across staffs. So I think that's important that we do keep it up to date and make sure that it's not so much that it's really timely to the year, but that as we evolve and things evolve, that we reflect it in there. On question though, on page 78, you have the scope of work. And I don't know if you could bring that up, but I just want to make sure I understand where that scope comes from. Is that from the staff saying these are areas that we think we need a little more guidance, or I'd like to understand where that scope came from.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly born out of our conversations with developers and our partner organizations such as RAB and Ready and the Chamber, specifically the industrial side of things. For the other updates, the data, right? We just had a brand new census in 2020, which is already 4 years ago, but we didn't have that updated data with the city population. I mean, we have the estimates with the American Community Survey, but as we want to update this as frequently as we can. And back in February, right, we reaffirmed our commitment to updating the plan every 5 years. And so we usually want to make it reflective of what's happening in the community today.
But that idea of like the industrial land being in there, that's something that we've identified over the last 5 years as something that we have less than we really think we know. But I didn't know if that came from a main process or it really was just a consensus by staff.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably consensus with teammates, but really just, yeah, looking at the patterns that have happened since the adoption.
Ms.
I see
Woodward?
that.
Thank you. I would also say, I think it's partly the discussion we've heard at council as well in terms of industrial land and where it is and where it's needed, and also recognizing that there is that growth that needs to happen, and is that located in the appropriate location? So I think we've heard that kind of throughout, and we wanted to make sure that we were taking another look at it and identifying where future growth can happen within that industrial land and plan appropriately for that.
Good, good. Thank you. And I appreciate Council President Carlson's comment about watching for what's inside the limits, but also on the edges, and make sure we, in that bigger picture. Last comment then, and just on the, on page 83, where you had the themes and looking at these other documents. And I really want to commend the staff for that idea that there is consistency across this, that it isn't that they're all just one-off things. I know that from my perspective, sometimes I think of the comp plan and then things like the active transportation builds underneath that they are in support of. But then when you look at these other documents like DMC, to see that consistency, it makes me think that our long-range planning is going in the right direction. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other discussion or questions? Councilmember Dennis?
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you for putting this work, and I agree with many comments of my colleague here. A couple questions I had. First, I'm going to jump in just because we were talking about the key themes. Could you, I guess I have three questions, but my first one, could you describe placemaking a little bit more, just for those who aren't familiar with that term?
Yeah, so placemaking would be, I mean, essentially creating areas of the city that people want to be in and want to stay in. So that could be the use of creative wayfinding to direct people. That could be use of artwork that's installed around the city, around the area, part of the infrastructure. So, for instance, sidewalks could have paintings on them. Walls could have murals, things like that.
Okay.
For activities or something
Activities,
to.
yep.
Okay, wonderful. We need more of that for sure. That was one of the comments I get often. The first one, diversification of transportation options. I have just a quick comment and then a question. So this weekend was just eye-opening for me. I had a situation where someone who had extreme accessibility needs needed to go to get medical assistance, and I accompanied her just for the entire day just to help out. But some of the things that I was brought to my attention is that even though hotels are supposed to be accessible to people for all ability levels, I hope, their shuttle services and transportation do not. And there's only one hotel in the entire city that I was made aware of that has accessible shuttle services for people who utilize wheelchairs. And I also realized some of the this weekend's extreme challenges people are facing who have accessibility needs that does not allow people to have access to our entire city. And so this is a huge issue, and so I'm looking at more through the equity lens of people who have many ability levels and limitations. But can you describe a little bit more on the diversification of the transportation options? Is that encompassing the need for more accessible transportation? And how can we work with partner stakeholders such as hotels to make sure that every single place in Rochester is accessible for everyone in Rochester?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I can start with the first half. I think the diversification of the transportation options, one is when we're reviewing the comp plan, we were working with our transit teammates and we found that those plans are very much obsolete. We've changed the location of our park and rides. We've changed the location of transit lines. So one, we want to reflect that in the plan. As for diversification, how do we get people to bike more, walk more, utilize transit, especially with the Link BRT? When it comes to hotel shuttles, I can't really speak to that with the private side of that, but I mean, it's something, a conversation could be had.
Okay, I definitely think the city should get involved with that situation because I've been made aware just recently of some of the extreme issues that are facing people with different needs.
Councilmember Dennis, can I just add to that before
yes,
you move to the
please.
next point? I just want to mention that the city does have services that we do provide, like RPT Go or micro transit, that can accommodate those types of services. While we can't mandate that hotels provide it. We do provide that service as a city. And so I'd encourage those folks to reach out to our
Okay.
team for
Okay.
those services.
I appreciate it. Just to follow up on that comment just now, from the experience that I had this weekend, there was an emergency situation and Zips was not able to change their schedule within the day. You have to have a day notice to have a Zips ride. And of course, if you're in an emergency, so this individual had to take the ambulance who could not accommodate their wheelchair. And so the amount of work that had to go through to find a pickup truck to accommodate a 400-pound wheelchair was astronomic. And when I experienced this on how someone with a special needs for transportation was not able to get potential life-saving treatment because there was no city option whatsoever for her to utilize. And the Mayo Clinic, which she, they worked very hard and to try to accommodate, but they didn't have a means at all. So this was an eye-opening experience that, oh my goodness, someone could lose their life because they don't have adequate transportation. I think that's a huge need of our city to make sure that those options are available for everyone, regardless of their needs. So, but thank you for looking into that. It's good that it's on the record. My other thought is when you talk about the public engagement strategy, which we didn't get to cover the incredible POCO survey situation that we were going to today. And I know that there is a lot of frustration with residents in our community according to the survey results. So I just curious, could you go a little bit more in depth on how your study is looking at enriching and amplifying people's voices here in our city and how we can make sure that all voices are heard regardless of their barriers of language, economics, ability to not have access, people like me who get things printed off because I have a hard time focusing on screens. You want to make sure that everyone has the ability to have a voice regardless if they don't have access to the internet or English is not their first language. So just a little bit more on how does your public engagement strategy incorporate true equity to make sure that people who are struggling, working several jobs, who don't have time to navigate systems are being reached and connected to?
Yep, thank you for that
Thank you.
question. I would say again, keeping it to inform and consult, just because previously when the plan was first adopted, that's when we did that heavy engagement lifting. And I mean, I know I can't speak to it in person, but I know folks over at the table, such as Ryan, worked very closely with engagement. So in terms of this specific engagement, I would say we are just here as a resource for residents to provide this information.
And the list of plans that you showed that have been done since the last comprehensive plan, those have often included significant community engagement that you are now wrapping into this next iteration, including the Vision 2050.
Correct.
So there's been significant additional gathering. It's just not necessarily part of your process. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment, yeah.
And Mayor Norton.
Yeah, this is on a slightly different topic. I'm thumbing through this and there is no mention of rail in here. And some of us, Heather Corcoran and I attended a meeting today. There's a state rail plan that's being devised and they are interested in whether we have any interest in being part of that. The state is in the planning stages and we have had, to my knowledge, in 6 years, zero discussion about rail. And this is primarily Amtrak that they're talking about. In my past 25 years, we've talked high-speed rail. Right now, they're talking Amtrak, slower rail. And so, in talking with Heather today, we're very clear to them, we don't have a position, to my knowledge, on anything having to do with rail. And so I'll be meeting with our administrator Zelms tomorrow, and I think she'd got a briefing today from the meeting that we had this afternoon. But we might want to add a discussion about rail, pro or con. I have no personal feeling about this myself because I'm new to the discussion, but there are considerable efforts to add rail across the southeast part of the state. So just throwing that out there. I didn't see it anywhere. I don't think we've had any discussions, but maybe if the state is moving ahead with something, we should have a discussion, a study session at some point and find out if there is any interest by the staff or the council. So we have a little bit more clear messaging on what we tell these folks, which is we don't have an opinion. We don't have a thought, which is what we said today. But anyway, that just happened this afternoon. So just laying that out there.
Thanks for that update. Councilmember Wall?
Thank you. I take it from Mr. Keene's comments that this 5-year update is more than 6 years old.
Yes, we were a bit late to getting this.
Okay, and that's fine. And in the cover page, it talks about how things change rapidly. Following up, I think, on Council Member Dennis's questions, have things changed enough? And I appreciated what our chair offered in the way of gathering of information under different auspices in the past many years. Have they changed enough that we need to do at least some lift with the public in this? I'll say when I was reading through this, I thought the December 11th, week of December 11th, which is coming so quickly, I thought that might include some of that, but now I understand it's just specific organizations. Do we need to do any engagement with the common person?
Yeah, I would say if we were doing a larger update, that would definitely be part of this process. But again, we're trying to keep it minimal in what the scope of what we're trying to update. Specifically, the data is really what we're focused on. And there just happen to be other tidbits that we've heard from you all in the council, as well as developers out in the community.
Minimal, could I use a word technical? A
Technical,
technical
yes.
update as opposed
Yes.
to really a new plan that's going to govern our vision for, okay?
Yeah, I would say it's more technical. In the update, had we been going through the core principles, that's really where we want the community's input to determine where should our community go in the future.
Okay, and then this more user-friendly document. How long will that be compared to the current document? You have any?
Yeah, probably a third of the size.
A third, okay. And then the existing document becomes an appendix, but there won't, it seems to me some of the data in the new data needs to be pretty technical as well. So are there two appendices? That is the new data plus the old document?
Yeah, so the old document will be all that analysis that had been done for the 2018 plan. So that's, traffic modeling within the plan. There's a lot of items that potentially don't need to be in a comprehensive plan. So really, we're just trying to put it on a diet. And so there will still be data in there, maps and figures, but they'll be more relevant to those items of the main, topics on the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds more accessible to the common person as well. So that sounds like a great plan.
Ms. Woodward?
I just to build off of what Elliot is saying, I think the other part to the comprehensive plan and kind of narrowing down, it's still going to follow the same general overview. It'll include all of the same things that are located in the comprehensive plan. It just means some of that technical data that probably belongs more in an appendix will be there, but we're not changing generally what the comprehensive plan is and what does that look like. So all of the elements that are in the comprehensive plan will generally be there. It's just we're going to kind of streamline it a little bit.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, thank you for your time and work, Mr. Mueller. We're shifting to a discussion around growth management and specifically related to the Olmsted County General Land Use Plan changes that have been proposed. And I think the General Land Use Plan goes by GLUP. I don't know if Mr. Yetzer will be using that terminology.
I intend to say general land use plan. Okay, Council President Carlson, council members, Ryan Yetzer, Assistant City Administrator for the City of Rochester. Just want to walk the group through a proposed amendment of the county's general land use plan and receive your feedback and have some discussion around what feedback you folks have for that change. So just to sort of recenter ourselves, I'm going to go through some slides that I think many of you have seen before, but I think it's important to reiterate kind of what we're talking about and why it's important. So first and foremost, shared vision. So both the city and the county see value in growth management. They call it something slightly different, but at the end of the day, both you folks at the city council and then the county board have agreed that growth management is important. We have a comprehensive plan like Elliot was just talking about, and at the county, they have a general land use plan, same sort of document. The county's general land use plan is a terrific document. It has, those 4 chapters that are listed there really align nicely with all of the stuff that Elliot was just talking about and what is included in the comprehensive plan. You talk about plans aligning. Our plans really do align, particularly in those 4 chapters. If you've not taken a look at it, I would encourage you to do so because it is a really nice document. And I believe it was updated in 2022. Now, of course, it worked for one time. Oh, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to take a few minutes on this slide. So the first thing I want to talk through is just this slide itself. So what we're talking about today is the urban service boundary. That's what the county is really at the center of this discussion with the amendment. So what you're looking at there is a map of the city limits. Everything that's grayed out there is Rochester's city limits. That blue line bubbling around the city limits is what we call our urban service area. And that black line outside of there is our ultimate sewer boundary. So we sometimes get confused of, is it the city limits, is it the urban service area, or is it that sewer boundary? And so what that black line shows is when we did that sanitary sewer master plan, these are all the areas that we could serve with sewer, with gravity sewer, if we so chose. However, in the county's general land use plan, it defines urban service areas as, and I'll quote, urban service areas include cities and their adjacent areas intended to be added to the cities in the next 25 to 50 years. That's right out of the land use plan. So we are tasked with designating where we think we can provide city services for the next 50 years. That's the blue line. We can serve city services beyond that area, but we keep it to where we believe we can reasonably serve in the next 25 to 50 years. As mentioned in the general land use plan, most of the population growth and housing within Olmsted County will happen within cities' urban service areas. It's an important tool for us to manage growth. It's important to note, I think someone pointed out to me, the city of Rochester adds roughly 13,000 people per decade. It's a trend that's continued since 1950, and it's likely to continue. And while we hope that we don't take up as much land as we add 13,000 units every decade, we will expand at our boundaries. And so it's important that we have tools to do that. And then the other piece is virtually no place in our urban service area is beyond 2 miles from the city limits. You may be getting there in the northwest corner, but everywhere else is 2 miles, and frankly, in most cases, it's closer to a mile. And the reason I point that out is it's significant because there is a state statute that allows cities to have a 2-mile extra jurisdictional authority that a lot of cities in Minnesota utilize. We are not able to utilize that tool because our county and the applicable townships have zoning. So if those entities have zoning, you cannot utilize that rule. But as we've talked to partner cities about this issue, a lot of them use that provision within state statute that we don't have access to. So this is a slide you will all recognize. We've shown it many times. What is growth management and why is it important? At the end of the day, what we're trying to provide through our growth management is a clear vision, both to the public, to property owners, to developers, and to ourselves on where investment should happen. So the colors have changed a little bit, but I want to walk us through this to make sure that we don't get confusion. The black line on this map now is the urban service area. So that's the area that we have said to the county we believe we can serve in the next 25 to 50 years. Everything in color, these red, green, yellow areas, that's our ultimate service boundary. So again, what we're doing here is we're taking that ultimate sewer service boundary and we're trying to phase it out. We're trying to show these are where services will be added. And the reason I say services is because so often we talk about just sewer, and it's significantly more than just sewer. Sewer is a big piece of the puzzle, the most expensive piece of the puzzle, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. There's also water availability, electric, storm sewer, transportation systems, road network updates, utilities and infrastructure, parks and public safety, such as fire protection as an example. So these things are all, these are investments that we are making continually. And so the idea here is we send them we communicate to the public, to a development community. Here's the areas that we are investing in within our urban service area. And so this is where we anticipate development to happen. I just want to highlight, there's oftentimes when we get into these conversations, we say, so for example, you can't see because the text box is over there, but the orangish red area says these areas are intended to be served beyond 2050. And everybody says, well, that's so far away. But I also want to put into context that the land use plan, the county's general land use plan, asks us to designate areas that we think will be served in the next 25 to 50 years. So while 2050 sounds forever away, it's half of the urban it's half of the gap of the urban service area. It's only 25 years away. So we often get into this notion of, well, the city's not going to serve me for 4 years. And while that's a really hard conversation to have, we're planning for 25, 50 years out, not 4 years out. And so, yes, we can change our plans to try to stack and get development or services there sooner. But at the same time, we have a lot of areas that need infrastructure investment, and it takes time to coordinate those investments. Let's see.
Can I
Yeah,
interrupt?
yeah, please.
One of the things I did was go through the GLUP language in detail, and there is specific language that says cities should develop sustainable, fiscally sound phasing plans for systems of public facilities and services consistent with their municipal service area boundaries. So that is this map.
That's what we're
based
trying to
on
do.
what this
Yep.
county is telling us we needed to do.
Yep,
For
great
25
point.
to 50 years.
Great point.
Okay.
Yep, that's what that map does. And so the next couple slides that I want to highlight is that there is flexibility within this, right? These maps are not etched in stone. And so the first option for flexibility is a growth management map amendment. The council established a policy, back in 2019 maybe, of how we look at these amendments and the criteria we create to review them. And so there is flexibility on this, but the idea here is that we want to be able to analyze and make sure that the amendment does not have adverse impacts elsewhere in our infrastructure. And so there have been 4 of those, and in fact, I think there's another one coming, where we have amended that growth management map. And so, again, these are case-by-case basis. We have a list of criteria of when we would support them. And so oftentimes the narrative gets shifted into, well, I'm beyond 2050, I'm never going to get services. And all I can say is come in and have a conversation with us, because there are other avenues to get there. And a growth management map amendment is one of them. Another one is interim development. Interim development is a tool to allow property to develop in more of a city style prior to city services being available. By using this tool, the property can develop ahead of sewer and other utilities. And as the city reaches that area, we can serve we can hook that subdivision up and serve them with utilities. In the Olmsted County General Land Use Plan, it states that cluster development could also be useful in preventing suburban development from creating a barrier to future urban services in the urban service area expansion. And that's the basis for interim development. We don't want to allow development that ends up being a wall forever in the city system. So if we tell a developer, well, we do think that area will be residential, we just can't serve it with utilities in the next 5 years, and I understand you want to develop today, this is an option for them to go through and develop it now in a way that doesn't impede our growth in the future. This is not a simple process, right? I think we all own that, and we are constantly working to approve it, but it's not an impossible one either. There are 2 examples of it. We have a policy that clearly lays out the steps. And frankly, I'd love another one to come through the system so we can show again how it works, because this could be a good tool to use. It's one that is almost more unknown than anything else, and that's one of the reasons it doesn't get used very often. And then lastly, another option is an urban service area amendment. So again, I think that the narrative sometimes gets flipped that the city will not will not be reasonable in their analysis of my request to be removed from the urban service area. And there are a handful that the city has reviewed and does support amendment requests. And one that frankly we heard about probably this time last year. And we said, well, we're going to be updating our comprehensive plan in 2025. Can you wait till then in the 5-year update? And that's what that 2025 one is that we're talking about. That's one that those folks said, yeah, that makes sense. We can wait, and then we'll take care of the update for them. That's how we'd like to funnel those types of requests. Areas where we look at it and we say, you know, we can't reasonably serve utilities there, so we should remove it, and that's one of those areas. So just wanted to point that out. So when it comes to the urban service area, I really boil it down into 3, maybe 4 primary concerns or primary objectives that we have in working with the urban service area. I'm going to jump to the 3rd bullet first, because bottom line is that changing our ability to effectively use the urban service area has a negative impact on housing creation. And that potentially is my #1 concern, which I'll get into in a moment. Chapter 6 of the county's general land use plan states that urban service areas have the greatest ability to accommodate housing affordability due to their compact nature. Municipal services allow for smaller, more affordable lot sizes and allow for denser housing styles. And that's well said. That's the basis for why we think that the urban service area is an important planning tool, is because it allows us to coordinate growth and have a more sustainable and affordable housing production cycle. The next is infrastructure planning. There's a number of examples that I can point to, but the city makes countless investments into an area before the housing even occurs, or the commercial, say along West Circle Drive, et cetera. There's a number of investments that we have to make with the assumption that development is going to happen and we're going to recoup on those investments. And so removing the ability to effectively do that is a concern for future infrastructure investments, which is also why I go back to housing and how that can negatively impact housing. Last one, 3rd one is environmental stewardship. Just at the end of the day, city sewer and city water systems provide a superior environmental protection as compared to private well and septic systems. Private well and septic systems can be done really well, and they can be safe for the environment, but by and large, city sewer and city water is safer for the environment. And I know none of us here were in these positions when it happened, but there's a very serious case of this that happened in Marion Township, and it cost the city significant funds to hook up that subdivision to the city due to failing septic systems. And so it's that type of concern that we're talking about.
And Mr. Yetzer, is that because the city had to cover the cost of removing the septic as well as this?
Yeah, I don't know the exact financial details, but the city used sales tax to cover the cost to subsidize the cost of those homes connecting onto city sewer.
Mr. Palmer?
Well, the detail on that from the sales taxes, that was 1,700 houses and $20 million.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was a significant cost.
10 houses. And they took half the cost of hooking up, and the city paid for that. So they got a better deal than the citizens of Rochester.
Yeah.
And they did it for the betterment of everyone.
Yes, yep. There's environmental reasons for that, and why it was important to do, but it was very expensive. Yes.
But again, just to clarify from Councilmember Palmer, the fact is the city has a financial risk when that happens and is expected to take that on. Luckily, in this case, we found sales tax, but I think what we're talking about here is when you have those, was it 2,000 homes? Yeah. 1,700. I mean, when that happens and they don't have the resources, the risk isn't to the county. The risk falls back to the city. And that's an important point with all this.
Yep, and then there's another scenario where an individual septic system could fail and city sewer is now available and they are connecting, years later, and it's significantly more expensive to retrofit it than it is to just do it up front the first time. Not saying it's inexpensive the first time either, right? That's expensive too. But in the long-term cost, it can have significant savings. The last one is a little bit harder to quantify, but the overall development process impact. The concern that we have is just that working through developments in a collaborative manner with developers or property owners becomes significantly more complicated if they're not, if they don't have motivation to work with the city in more of a good faith to work through problems and to be collaborative in the process. And so that's another concern we have of removing the city's ability to have an urban service area, or at least have more authority within our urban service area, is that we potentially lose some of that collaboration. I also have concerns of just lengthening out the process. One of the things that you folks were laser focused on with the UDC and that we've received accolades around the state for is streamlining our development process with predictability. And this feels like there's less predictability than if we had a more streamlined way to get an answer of whether or not a development can move forward. So I want to walk through the amendment that is being considered. So this is the language that currently exists in the county's land use plan. And I've highlighted the section that has caused a lot of the conversation, which is with a resolution with findings of support from all applicable cities. Well, if a property comes forward and doesn't have a resolution of support, then that application is deemed incomplete. And so we did do this once. You folks voted on this, the Niggin property in 2023. You folks passed a resolution not supporting the removal of the urban service of this property from the urban service area. That was then passed along to the property owner, and they were not able to move their application forward. One place where I think we own some error on this is I don't know that we did a good enough job of communicating why we landed where we landed. While we, the staff, passed that on to the property owner, I don't think we did a good enough job of communicating to the county and or the county commissioners of why we landed where we landed. And so I do think that's an error on our part that we can definitely improve on in the future. So the red text on this slide is some of the proposed new language, and I'll flip to the other ones here in a moment. This first section, I won't read it off, but it essentially is just creating the process. It's saying that cities have 60 days to act, and the county has 30 days to act once the cities put their amendment forward. So what this is saying is when a property owner applies, the county will notify the city. The city, we'd then bring it to you guys for either a resolution for or against the proposal, and then that resolution would be forwarded on to the county. The county would then have 30 days to approve or deny. So the key difference here is where the Niggin one, by not supporting it, it couldn't move forward. The change now is it will move forward, and the county board will make the final decision on whether or not that amendment is made.
So just a point of clarification on that, with the less predictability that you said a few minutes ago, that's what you mean? Because
Yep.
if we approve it or don't approve it, we still don't know what the county would potentially decide.
Right. I mean, we're talking about at least a 90-day process. And so if there's ever misalignment between, we are saying it shouldn't be approved and they want to try their luck at the county board. We're taking 60 days to get yours. We're taking 30 days to bring it to the county. And then if it's ultimately denied anyways, well, now we've wasted 3 months of the development process at least, where we could have had more clarity up front of whether or not that would be approved or denied.
Mr. Palmer, Councilmember Palmer?
Can you go back to slide 65? So I understand the Niggin property, and I've been involved with some of the conversations about it. Yes, we could have done a better job of communication. We said that after we denied it. But the take on this is there's sewer to where the liquor store is on West Circle Drive. If we take that sewer and move it to where the old golf course is and extend it through the Niggin property, now you extend it to 60th Avenue, which is going to be the new interchange, right?
Right.
So if we don't have the Niggin property in the urban service area, we don't upgrade our sewer line, and we do not service the area in Highway 14 interchange. Is that not correct?
Correct. Everything there that's sort of bubbled in blue would never receive sewer if the Niggin property were removed. And then you kind of see on to the north there, the circle of where the Highway 14 interchange is. And so while that may feel forever from now, It's also not that far out when you think about the pressures that will come with a new interchange there. And so, yeah. it's a great
In the
point.
city also, I mean, because I was involved with some of the sit-down meetings and site meetings on it, so that we actually had city staff out talking to the family. And the big thing to remember is that there's a creek that runs here, Cascade Creek, and we can protect that with some finances that other people cannot connect. And there's a lot of feedlots upstream of this, which then protects the water coming into Rochester. Now, on the same token, on the south side, the Lily Farms area, we allowed to leave the urban service area because we could not serve it with water. Is that not correct?
That's correct. The elevation of that area, we were unable to serve with city water, which is part of the reason why, you know, if you stand on the site, you may say, well, they'll let this part out. And the reason we were not in favor of that is because it is lower. We can serve it with city water. Those creeks are a natural place for sewers to run because of water also flows that way. So, yeah, I think those are all great points of why this property is different than Lily Farms or the Connolly property to the south.
And my point being, if we can't service it, we say we can't and they move ahead. So
Right. Yep.
that's, thank you.
Exactly.
Mayor Norton had a comment or question.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think it's more of a question, and I think you've touched on it, but it feels like with this new process, developers are going to start going to the county first, go to the county first, have all this discussion, then come to the city, and then go back to the county, if I'm understanding this correctly. So it feels a little bit like the city, they might come to us later and complicate and drag out a process. It feels a little clunky to me. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, yes, that's one possibility. Another is that they do start with us and we say, well, we won't support this. And they say, well, where do I apply? And then we say, okay, you got to go to the county and ask them about it, which isn't a great back and forth either. So yeah, either of those could happen.
Councilmember Dennis.
All right. So yeah, you're talking about collaboration, which I think is extremely important. We've had meetings with the county before the city, county, work on other issues. Why can't we do that with this? Why can't we just have I don't know if is there something in some kind of language that we can't just have a big meeting and develop the language of the amendment all together with the county, so that we can come, work together and have a very efficient and successful, one-time thing instead of putting all the effort into us doing this huge amendment and then going to the county, having it fail or having, can we just meet together?
So point of
I hope so, but I'm going to get to
Yeah.
that.
This
There's more
is-
slides.
This is the county's proposed amendment to their plan. So
Mm-hmm.
this is coming from them, but staff have been working closely with county staff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if I don't answer your question, or if we don't have discussion around it, let's come back to it. But that is a good point to remind that what's on your screen is not something we have control over. This is an amendment that is being proposed through Olmsted County and that the county board will ultimately vote on. And so at this moment, I'm more or less informing you folks that this is what the amendment is on the table. And I'm going to get to some slides to have the discussion. I think
Maybe just to answer the question, can we not just have a giant, huge meeting, like, not this dais won't be sufficient, but having a big round table with the county and doing this once, we all are kind of informed of what's going on. Is that possible? Have we ever done a big joint county city vote on a issue like this at one time?
Council President, Councilmember Dennis, I think part of the challenge is that the county board is moving pretty quickly with this. And I don't recall the date I think December 12th is the date that they now have a public hearing.
16th,
17th.
17th.
Okay,
So
well, can't we just join in? I mean, to a certain extent, like I know I'm just like logistics wise, I feel like we're going to be using a lot of time and effort and many staff hours. Is it possible for us all to work with the county and just say, can we meet at one time? I mean, is it possible? That's what I'm asking.
we could ask, but we really need to have this conversation in order to still, as they continue through their process, be able to provide information to them.
And I think there have been a lot of
Thank you.
discussions, including Councilmember Wall going to speak at county board meetings as they've talked about this. Mr. Yetzer, our joint meetings have happened in subsections, but ultimately this is the county's decision. So we have to come up with our position on it to be able to share with the county as they consider making this formal change that they have control over.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I can just finish walking through the proposed language. So I think there's been a slight tweak to this first section, or slight tweak to this first section that more or less will say, you know, if the city doesn't reply, it's not a suggestion of opposed or in favor of the amendment. And then the second part there talks about how the city should respond. So provide reasonable findings for the objection, including specific environmental, financial, infrastructure impacts to the proposed amendment. So these would be what we would use to sort of frame our recommendation that would then be forwarded on to the county. So some analysis from our perspective on this issue, and I know I've had conversations with many of you folks offline, but first and foremost, I think process clarity can be helpful. I definitely commend the county on that piece of it. Of, you know, like I said, with the Niggin property, I think there was the process was not clear, and that was part of what caused some of the confusion in that situation. And like I said, I think we could have done a better job of communicating the result that you folks voted on with the county. And so if that's clarified in process of how we should apply and communicate the change, I think that's a great outcome. Some of the suggestions that we feel we should push for as a city is to delegate the decision to the applicable city and follow the county's criteria in doing so. So whether it be those items on that last slide that I just showed you, or if the county were to create new criteria through this text amendment that the city should follow, then we should do so. Another good outcome would be, you know, if they clarified that following the city's determination, we are to send a memo to the county board outlining why we landed on that decision, something of that effect. But I think that cities are best positioned to understand the investments that you folks have made into certain areas. And so I think it makes more sense for the county to sort of set the process and dictate the criteria and sort of set the box for us to play in, but then for the city to follow that process and make the decision accordingly. In addition to that, or maybe secondary to that, I think including further decision criteria in the land use plan text could be helpful. I know that when the county put this memo together to their county board, they had some criteria in there. I think those were really well done, but I do think it's helpful for those to be in the text so that not just now, but 25 years from now or 10 years from now, we have a good understanding of how that decision should be framed. Much like we do with our land use plan amendments, there's like, I think 12 criteria in the comp plan that you folks review, or that our team reviews and forwards on to you folks for a decision. And then lastly, in our review of that criteria, there's maybe a couple that could be added that recognize the investments that cities have made, or the impact it could have on neighboring properties. For the Niggin one, for example, that one would mean none of the neighbors are served with sewer. So are they all aware of that change, that because one property comes out, they will never be able to develop their property on city services? So those are some of our thoughts, looking for some of your feedback in this conversation. And so then just some policy considerations to frame the discussion, and then I'd love to hear what you all think. But what is, first and foremost, some policy considerations to think about is, how does this change, or this proposed change, impact your strategic priority of economic vibrancy and growth management? How does this impact the community division of how land should develop and how we should grow as a community within the comprehensive plan? What's the impact this could have on infrastructure investments and our confidence in doing that? And what's the impact this could have on meeting housing goals that we have agreed to as a county, to try to have an impact on housing affordability? And then lastly, I know on here I say December 5th. My understanding is that it is now that date of the county board meeting has now moved to December 17th, it sounds like. And so my question to all of you, getting at Councilmember Dennis's question there, is what formal action, if any, would you folks like us to take before the December 17th meeting? Is there a letter that we should be sending, something of that nature? So just looking for feedback, happy to stand for any questions on anything I covered. Otherwise, really looking for your feedback. Thank you.
I know that there are a number of questions and comments, so I'll start with Councilmember Keen, who I think has thought about a few questions ahead of time, or you ready to
Sure,
go?
I can start. I didn't think I would, but,
Well, no one else jumped to it, so I'm calling on you.
all right. Again, I just want to set the stage here a little bit to understand. You talk about the investments and we talk about sewer, but I did want to understand when you talk about what type of investments the city makes. I mean, I know back in 2021, Public Works came to us with the idea of like, we want to invest ahead, and I think it was a multi-million-dollar project to extend sewer to the north, in the Northwest, and that's worked out well for us. But is that the main kind of investments we're talking about? Is there also transportation, streets, fire stations, things like that?
Yeah, so it's a good example and one that we can, a real life example that I think we can frame out to think about. So yes, sewer was proactively put into the northwest for housing to hopefully follow. And let's just park that on the side for a moment, because I think that's important in and of itself. But ahead of that was a new water tower from RPU in the area. Ahead of that was a new RPU substation in the area, expecting growth in the northwest. You also have in your CIP for next year to redo 50th Avenue to realize that growth. There's also the county's investments on what folks are diming as the new West Circle Drive further out west. And so there's all of those sorts of investments, the Highway 14 interchange, all of these things that have stacked. And now sewer is a huge one. And traditionally, what we've done is housing developments have paid for sewer to extend. However, in this one, what we did is a build it and they will come model. We built the sewer out and with the expectation that housing development was going to follow. And so far it has. And so that's great. We recoup those costs through development. But the other piece to that is now that that's happening, as I've communicated before, the next 2 years will be spent along Highway 14 upsizing a sewer pipe. And when we upsize that sewer pipe, we're anticipating not just the West Zumbro that you just did, but the one beyond that. And so how do we upsize that pipe if we're not confident that the land beyond that becomes urban service, hooks onto urban services at some point? We are potentially either choosing to not take the risk and undersizing infrastructure, which is capping our housing growth, or we're taking the risk and putting in large infrastructure without assurances that housing, the next phase of housing will happen. And so I think the sewer one is a good example, but I want to emphasize that it's more than sewer. I also will point out the fire strategic plan and their call for a Northwest fire station. There was a lot of things stacking for why we then decided to do the sewer infrastructure, but it's a whole accumulation of things that are not inexpensive that point to that decision.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think this was my follow-up, but I think you've already answered it. Wouldn't it have been prudent for me that if I don't have control of what's out there, that we should be pulling back on these investments because there's a risk that they're not going to end up getting used?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my concern with the impact to housing is now instead of say the North Rock project that we've participated in, now instead of the sewer being there, we're going to say add that to your financing, build the sewer, and make sure all your neighbors are on board with it, because all of that should be built at one time. And now we're just asking property owners to front that cost and take on that risk, which is what drives up housing costs.
Yep. Okay. All right. Ken, again, it's a follow-up. I mean, you're talking about the investments the city makes when you're dealing with this urban service area. What type of investments do the county make in support of, like, they're going to want to take control of this decision, but do they have similar investments that they have to make that are at risk, or can you help me with understand that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The one investment that I think I can come to mind is larger streets, such as 60th Avenue, and the interchange that's happening with there. So major thoroughfares are an investment that the county makes. Beyond that, all of the utility investments that are being made are born from the city. Those are not investments that the county is incurring. And likewise, the reason going back to why I think cities are better positioned, whether it be Rochester, Byron, whoever, are better positioned is because you folks are the ones who are approving the budget and understand where we've invested in those utility infrastructure, less so than the county. And so I think, but even beyond that, I think I would argue that part of the decision for 60th Avenue and the Highway 14 interchange was that our urban service area was there and that we were anticipating growth in that area. And so I would maybe take a bit of a leap to say that even the county uses the cities, Rochester's, Byron's, et cetera, in deciding where they funnel their major infrastructure upgrades, such as streets.
I know we use it for ROCOG and we're talking about planning transportation, so I know that's true. Slightly different question here is, this is coming up in the Olmsted County Commissioners are gonna meet, they have public input. I've been through some of their process meetings. I guess when we're talking about this decision moving, it's unclear to me who really benefits. I don't see what the county gets out of it. I see the city having potential problems with it, but who does this benefit?
Yeah. I think the best answer I can have to that is it benefits either an individual property owner or an individual developer who is pushing to have a essentially political decision made that doesn't align with much larger infrastructure planning that's, again, on a 25 to 50-year horizon. And is frankly ignoring a lot of the maps we've put out to try to direct these sorts of conversations.
And it's not, I would just add to that, it's not only the maps we've put out, it's that the county incorporates and requires us to phase out our development to include in their plans.
Yep, it's a great point. Yep.
All right, I was just, again, it is important to me, I'm trying to make this point that, or trying to understand that it seems like the city has the most at risk, but the county wants to make the call, and I'm trying to get my head around that. I don't know if they feel, is it because of the Niggin property that they feel we did it wrong, or I don't understand the process or politics or problems that got us to this point, that they don't want the city of Byron or the city of Stewartville or the city of Rochester to have control of that. They want to have the individual property owners. I'm not sure where that comes from.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'm best positioned to answer that question. I think the commissioners themselves are better positioned to answer that. What I can say is that over the last handful of months, there has been a number of discussions that we've had around this, and certainly some of those discussions have not played out the way that we intended them to, and messages got lost along the way. And so I've been clear that I own any blame that I can on those issues, and certainly did not want those things to unravel the way they did, and I accept that responsibility, but I'm hopeful that we can kind of put that aside and make a better policy decision rather than an emotional one based on conversations that have happened over the last couple of months.
Your points, policy considerations asked the council, like, what should we do between November 25th and 17th of December? And I know we've already sent a letter. I think they understand the city's perspective. I know I was there when Councilmember Wall spoke at open comment, but I also saw him take a 6-1 vote against. So I'm not sure if this new information, as far as the cost things and the impact, that this is kind of hard to get your head around sometimes when you talk about past 50 or 2050. It is one of these things that it's hard on me sometimes to talk about planning that's more than 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future. But in fact, housing has got to be that kind of long-term thing. We've also talked, but I think it gets lost in this, some of the environmental concerns here. You talked about the Marion Township things and the idea of, like, why would the state push us to do this? And it has to do with some of these things can be really detrimental to our environment with the expansion of septic. But most of these there's already rules in the county that they've got to be on like 4-acre lots. Most of those things are not really big at risk right now.
What do you mean big at risk?
Well, I think of like some of the areas that are in Ward 1 right now were developed outside the city, and they had septic, like 3 septic fields on a 1-acre field. That turned out to be difficult, and they had to be resolved. But when I see the kind of development that's happening right now in the county, there are rules that say you have to have a 4 acres per per lot. Yeah, I mean, there's rules that'll protect us from that, but they also have the detriment that they basically spread our population around a lot. They work against our density things that help our transportation.
Which goes against their own plan.
Yeah, which again, I would just highlight that their land use plan says that we should be focusing on, denser development to meet our housing goals. And again, I would just reiterate that, yeah, I believe it's a 2-acre lot, at least maybe in most cases, maybe not all. I don't know all the different ordinances in the county, but even a 2-acre lot is not a 50-year decision. It's not, you will eventually run out of space for a septic system there too.
Okay.
And eventually need city services. And so when those happen right on the edges of cities, it creates a challenge.
Okay, so I make a last point here. I feel like we're arguing against some of the housing things here, but as a council member in Rochester, I actually appreciate the housing diversity that comes from the townships, that comes from the small towns around here. There's people who come to work in this economy that want those sort of options, and I think it's good that they're there. I don't want to fight against that. I know that there's township people that feel like maybe they're trying to protect their way of life, but I don't think there's anything fighting against that. This really has to do with in support of the city of Rochester's economic development, which everybody, wants to see over the next 10, 20, 30 years, that it's important that we be able to develop the housing for that. And I think the county almost feels more aligned with that than the city sometimes. They seem to be doing it really, they're the housing authority here. So I'm hoping that as they look at look at this same problem from different perspectives, they might come to a different arrangement as far as what they're voting on next month.
Thanks for those thoughtful comments. Ms. Elms?
Could I just offer in what you were saying, it sort of harkens back to your meeting earlier. Wait, we're still in November, earlier in November, when we were talking about a major development that's happening downtown with a private investor, Mayo Clinic, and an idea was brought forward to have a revocable permit, yet they're going to, they're hoping in good faith that this revocable permit will never be revoked for a $5 billion investment in the middle of the city, and the whole time spending. I think the challenge is it feels to staff as we're coming before you to make these recommendations for very expensive investments, because we have all of this planning, because we know that you can't just spend it everywhere, right? To try to meet the fiscal prudence factor for both our taxpayers, but also the ratepayers for those utilities, that it makes it harder for us to come to you and then say, we're confident, in a perfect world, everything in the GLUP, everything in the comprehensive plan, all of the findings that we send, we would be confident that that would go forward. But realistically, it could be revoked. And so that is the concern. And then as you go to your 6-year master plan and financial plan for sewer, what does that mean if we expend this? There aren't connections. The people that end up paying for that are the ratepayers, because at some point you still have to continue moving forward with a almost $92 million capacity upgrade at the plant. We still have to continue to replace and repair existing pipes, but then the question becomes, where or do you actually continue to make those investments, and a confidence level in whether or not you're willing to do that, recognizing there could be one thing at some point that really disrupts your investment.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmer?
Thank you. This started, in the good old days, we had joint planning and you guys all sat in the same room, county and the city, and that got changed. And so that's kind of the start of this entire episode. And so then it became apparent that something wasn't working. But my experience with 2 of these projects that we've been working on, one down 11th Avenue Southwest, if we don't extend the sewer, if we do extend the sewer, you could get 500 acres back into the urban service area that we could service with services, which to me makes a lot of sense. I was at the Olmsted County Planning and Zoning meeting last Wednesday, and they made changes during that meeting to what they are proposing, which I haven't seen. The other one is that they didn't have any of this criteria. So my hope, and what I've been told, is that our city staff and the county staff are sitting down discussing the criteria that they want to have and that we want to have. And you're saying, my understanding is that criteria is what the city would use. We'd make the judgment, and then we'd send it to the county saying, this is our judgment. Am I getting that right?
That would be my hope. That would be our hope, yes, is that.
And that would work for everybody involved.
I hope so.
I mean, why, I mean, there should be a set of criteria. If I'm an owner out there of a large parcel of property and I want to develop, I would like to at least know the things I have to do to get to that point. That's
Right.
what you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about, yep.
And so what we're talking about in infrastructure is if I'm bringing out a 40-inch line and I'm really going to bring a 60-inch line to service someplace, that's an investment that the city's making, that if somebody says, well, I'm not going to assign to the city, we have to pay for that somehow.
Exactly.
And so I'd hope that the staff, both sides, would sit down and find some criteria that works for everybody. I don't know why not. I mean, this county has great staff. We have great staff, so I don't know why not. But one of the county commissioners brings up an issue, and it's a tough one for me, is that they have people they represent in the townships, and they're not in the city. So why should we, as a city, have control over a property that's out in the county? What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I'd have a couple of answers. First, which is probably the worst of the answers, is that this is not an uncommon authority. I started with that, right? It's a tool that's used all over the state, that when you're just outside of city limits, it's not uncommon for the city to have some authority over what happens with the land. And we're not saying you can't continue doing what you're doing, and we're not saying you can't develop within the existing zoning. We're just asking that you don't undermine infrastructure investments that are being made. But the other, maybe the better answer is, I would argue that that the county board is representing those folks by setting criteria that is fair, and that recognizes all of the concerns that we've been talking about, and that by doing that they are representing those people. Additionally, if the process or requirement, however you want to word it, is that we send that memo along that sort of spells out what decision was made and why, that allows the commissioner to have some oversight on it as well, of, well, did the city follow the criteria we set or not? And so through those two avenues, I do feel like they are representing the individuals that are just outside city limits, but not yet in city limits.
Thank you.
Mayor Norton?
Thank you. I want you, could you go back one slide, or I don't know who's got the. So I want to kind of get back to this and just say, for me, this makes a lot of sense. I was pleased to see this slide. I think the clarity and clear criteria is great. But I think those proposed tweaks make sense from a city's perspective, that we're doing all the things that we've talked about. I think Councilmember Palmer and Councilmember Keene outlined a lot of really important issues that this will address. And I think the idea that we're going to follow the adopted GLUP, and that we're going to be very clear about what we're doing and why, and stating that in some sort of policy or however you're going to bring this forward, an agreement, will make sense. And I guess I had not realized up to this point that perhaps a misunderstanding about a prior decision was maybe the impetus for some of the, the concern raised by our friends over on the county commission side. And it makes me sad, but we need to learn from things that don't go so well. I think you've owned up to that and said, maybe we weren't perfect, and we'll do better. And this is, I thought you outlined here at this analysis page pretty clearly what you think we can do better to both address some of the concerns that the county has, but also really address the fiscal concerns and investment concerns that we have as a city, and the concern we have for the impact on our taxpayers. I also wanted to say, we've worked really hard on our relationship with the county, and this has been really hard. I just want to kind of say on the record to have this happen, because we've been working for years. I know when Council President Carlson was elected, she said, we are going to work on this together, and I think we've made great progress. We've done a lot of very difficult negotiating. Our administrator Zelms and the former administrator Heidi Welsh really worked hard on not only building relationships personally, but really digging into some serious policy issues and coming out with solutions that worked for everyone. And I'm hoping that the county is hearing what we're saying, and that we can get there. And lastly, I'll just say, and I think for county commissioners, just like all of you and like me, we hear from our constituents. And when a constituent has a complaint or concern and feels like something hasn't gone their way, it makes sense that they would bring that concern forward. So I respect the fact that that's what the county commissioners have done. And we also have policy considerations and big picture policy implications that we have to weigh too. And that's the tough part here. And all of you know from decisions each and every one of you have made, when you take your vote that someone doesn't like something you've done. And that's hard, especially if it's someone you know, or, you know, in the county, maybe more personally, because it's a more rural area. So I was going to say that. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, not a GLUP, but a GULP, gulp, on hearing that our wastewater treatment facility and treatment facility is up to $92 million.
It is, but it's funded.
It was what you knew, but it's funded, and a lot of that's not coming from city or ratepayers.
Last I heard it was in the 80s, so I was like, 92 million. So yes, we have huge investments that we're making and we need to be responsible about them. So thank you for that.
So Mayor, I wrote some notes down, and literally you just said my first paragraph around how much we value our relationship with the county and how much great work we as county or council members have worked with county commissioners, how great our administration works with county administration. This is just leaps and bounds from where it was years ago. So it's really, really important that we continue to work towards a solution that works for all of us in this situation. And also that idea that I understand that the county commissioners are hearing concerns from their constituents and are trying to figure out what that means from a policy perspective. But we're all here representing our constituents and thinking about the impacts on our taxpayers from a financial perspective, but also the environmental implications of growing differently than our comprehensive plan indicates. So my approach to this has been to go through their outstanding general land use plan. It aligns so closely with what we care about as a city and just is really reassuring. There's I have pages of notes which I won't go through with you, but these issues around housing and environmental protection and how important this contiguous development and thinking about density around the edges of our cities is, we've talked about that already, but one really, really important part that is present throughout that plan is the complications or how complicated the landscape of policy and land use is between townships, the city, and the county, and how essential it is that there's coordination and cooperation between our bodies in making the best decisions for our constituents based on the resources that we have in this community. So that's where I just think we're taking a step away from that very clearly identified priority in the GLUP that the county states over and over again. So I hope that they'll read the broader plan, remember that we are in this together and we want to be really responsible to our resources that are limited. So I'm still hopeful that there can be some good work together done in the next couple of weeks. And finally, this is such a clear example of why it's important that we follow our comprehensive plan and focus on infill development because of how incredibly resource intensive and expensive it is to grow outward in this community. So future council members, focus on infill. Okay, I have many other people who want to speak. Councilmember Dennis is next.
All right, thank you so much. So I appreciate informing us and bringing this information to us, because obviously information is to be engaged and insightful legislator needs to, is a priority. But if you could go back to your slide of what you're asking of us, the policy considerations, the last slide, please. Thank you. So I think some of these wordings that we have here in front of us, I don't want to say are loaded language, but are kind of unanswerable questions. You want to know the impact of the change, the impact of our ability, the impact of the confidence. These future, magic ball, crystal balls of what it's going to be like. I think it is just, we live in a medical city, but this is not brain surgery. You want to know what the county thinks, you ask them. If you want to know how, what, people their motives are. We don't assume their motives. We don't try to, think of what intention they have, as I think, are trying to do. And if you've watched the oversight, the outside agency oversight committee that was earlier today, the same thing, having the lived experiences with us at a giant round table is what we need to do. So for the last question, what additional formal actions is needed before December 17th, I think is the correction. Many of us are going to sit around a table this week at some Thanksgiving celebration, and that's what you do. You pull up extra chairs, you make a longer table, bring people in and sit down and just say, hey, let's be authentic and real, and where are you coming from, and how can we work together? And I think before the 17th of December, we just need a larger table. Come in here, push chairs around, get the county commissioners. I mean, there's plenty of dates. You can throw out Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, where this room is accessible to just have us get together. I mean, we talk about these platitudes of collaboration, yet we're just like, well, we assume we're going to, most assumptions are false because we don't even have the people in the room. So you ask us what we want to do with these things. I mean, we can't look into the future unless we, and talk to people and have real courageous conversations. And the first step is to meet. So I propose that we find dates. Not everyone is always able to meet, but you throw out a few Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Mondays. This is a full-time job. It's paid that way. So I hope everyone now and in the future consider this a full-time job. We should clear our schedules and make this work so that we don't waste valuable staff time. If you look at, my mind's constantly calculating the amount of salaries in this room. Okay, 200, but how many hundred, you look at incredible amounts of staff work being done on both here and on the county. Why don't we just come together and shave those time and off and combine resources and just have a real authentic meeting? And it can be a study session like this. It doesn't have to be a formal, we need time to advertise it for the public. We need to be transparency over the internet or recordings. But I don't think we need to make more of this and spend more time on this. Let's have a Thanksgiving, not, but gratitude for each other, and just have a large table in the next couple weeks, or just a circle of chairs, and come up with a conclusion of what we all want. And that way we don't have these, I believe, really powerfully upsetting emails that are coming through, attacking each other. This is not what we are signed up. We're a nonpartisan group. The county is a nonpartisan group. We put people before politics, and we should get together and say this is what we want and get it taken care of. I don't feel comfortable assuming or the county's motives or intents on this situation. And I think to answer all of these questions would be a simple getting together and talking it out. So that's my solution, and I would hope that can be worked out, and invite all the council, all the county commissioners, whatever staff wants to show up, and just come to a win-win-win agreement, because that's the way government should be. Thank you.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. I have a couple questions that actually might overlap with Mr. Moeller, who's not here anymore. But could you go to slide 56, please, which is, I believe, slide 110 in our packet on our little
Those slide numbers are likely
presentation.
from different presentations.
It's
You know what?
Is it from this presentation or from Mr.
No,
Muller's
if
presentation?
you go back to 56, isn't?
Can you tell me what's on the slide?
Yeah, it's it's the flexibility slide with the growth management map.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it as slide 6, page 110, but you're there you go. Oh, it's 60 there. Okay, I think there were several slides that were the same. So you had mentioned that pink red area, Mr. Yetzer, as that northeast, the east boundary of that section kind of wends its way southeast and to the east. Is that the Winlac watershed to the north and east? The basis of my question is, our city mostly sits in the Greater Zumbro watershed, and I'm just wondering if that growth management map is limiting us, keeping us from overlapping into Winlac.
So what I can, well, I don't know where that line is. What I can say is on these areas, so there's the like darker orange color and then there's that light pink color.
Yep.
That light pink color is where suburban subdivisions already exist or are zoned for it. So we are likely never going to serve sewer in those areas, and that is likely a natural growth boundary that the city will never exceed. And so as you see that black line of the ultimate sewer boundary, we didn't even study serving sewer in those areas because of the large lots. It's unlikely that we would ever serve sewer. So if it's in that area, then yeah, we will likely never have city services in that area.
So for instance, like Connemara Hills, which is just east of Hawthorne Hills and then up the hill.
Sure.
Up the Decorah edge to the karst up there from Hadley Creek.
That over here?
No, that's right here. That's literally right here. So like the Lily Ponds area is the reason we won't ever be servicing those areas. It's that suburban large lot subdivision, but is it in part because of the EOC and that comprehensive surface water management plan that when we were developing that, it was suggested that we have no more lift stations for sewage, and it just makes sewer lines really difficult in those areas to get through to them?
I
Or
don't think those are areas that we couldn't physically serve with gravity sewer. They are areas that were designated for suburban development many years ago and are now natural boundaries to the city. So it's more of a cost than it is anything else.
And that was my next question. If somehow this growth management map or plan decided to expand into those areas, do you have a count for how many septic tanks would need to be replaced? You know, is it up again in that 20 million figure like the 1,700 that we had to do?
I would imagine
several years ago?
the difference is with the Marion one, those were relatively smaller lots, and these pink areas are relatively large lots. So actually, it's probably more expensive because there's more lot area on those. So you've got to send the sewer pipe further, which is part of why the 2 acre lot's expensive, is because you serve it on a per acre basis. So probably more expensive, and as the years go, it just gets more and more expensive. And that was
Sure.
20 years ago or whatever it was. So,
Right.
you know,
So the chances of expanding into those true suburban areas that are those pinkish red areas is
it's virtually none.
Got it.
I never
Okay.
say never in a situation where there's mass failing septics, but what happens is rarely are they all failing at the same time, right? So I've just replaced mine. Why would I want to connect to sewer because yours failed? I
Right.
just replaced mine.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you for that. And then also, I just want to echo what the mayor and what
Whatever my name is.
you to my right,
Council President.
President Carlson. Yeah, the importance of working together, the importance of making our community the best it can be. And I really prefer verbiage. This won't be coming to vote for this particular body, but for the next one. And rarely do I lean toward economics and fiduciary responsibility, but we are about 70% of the county. And it's really important that we proceed in a way that we can serve our public safely. And with that being the largest portion of our budget, I think it's really important that we kind of stay on the trajectory that we're considering staying on with the verbiage that we have.
Thank you. Councilmember Wall's been eagerly awaiting comment.
So I've been paying close attention to the language that we have used here on the dais, and we'll pick on one word that you two, Mr. Yetzer, have used, and I know none of us meant it in this way, but you've talked about hope, and in my view, hope is not a good plan. You know, if we hope something's going to happen before December 17th, we could be desperately disappointed. So I'll be maybe a little bit more pointed in Mr. Palmer's question. are we really actively involved, city to county, in really serious negotiations so that the tweaks that you mentioned or outlined are possible to be added to language on December 17th?
Yes, we have been having conversations with staff about adding criteria and those sorts of things. If I'm going to be frank, I'm less confident in the flipping of that decision from county to city. Where I feel like this is headed is the county is going to set the criteria and they're going to make the decision. And that's what I'm communicating to you folks of has us concerned, and still hope there's time to flip that back. Again, the county setting the box, the county setting the criteria, the county telling us how to review these, but then allowing the cities to make that analysis and decision and ultimately forward along our review. And so when I ask, what if anything should we do before the 17th, I do think there's value in submitting a comment that sort of reflects that. I don't know that we can't vote on anything, but sort of a collective head nod that, yeah, that's what we should do, it would be helpful. And even though I can't remember who said it, one of the council members said, I think the county understands where we stand on it. I think they do too, but I also think it's important to have that reflected in the documents for the county packet.
Thank you, and I would absolutely be all in favor of that. I think we speak pretty much with unanimity here. I also have great respect for our city staff and for county staff too, and I'm thankful that one sits here who's very important. I respect so many of our county commissioners. I would like to believe that reasonable people could come together, not based on hope, but based on here are our real needs for moving forward. So thanks for that work. I would stand behind any kind of council support for us being able to protect the financial, environmental risks for our city and county.
That was very well said. Thank you. I'm hoping for the best in people, but I'm asking for concrete action from us to make sure those statements are clearly being considered. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Yetzer. Do we want to take just a 5-minute break and then we will move on to our fire service? Sounds good.
Recording stopped.
Hello, testing. Can you hear me? Hello, testing. How about now? Is it still looping? Okay, I think I was just close to the audio. Testing, testing. Hello. Testing. Testing.
Testing, testing. You're not gonna work right now. It's not gonna work right now.
Hello, I can hear you, Anne.
Testing to Jessica.
I can hear you.
Recording in progress.
fire service contracts, and I will turn it over to Chief Kurska to start us off.
Mayor, Council President, City Council, thank you for having me. I'll try to give you an update on our current fire protection contract with the 4 surrounding townships. Some of the background, we've had fire protection agreements with the 4 surrounding townships with Rochester Fire going back to 1936. A contract similar to what we have today has been in place since 2005. We're currently approaching the end of a 10-year contract. We have a contract with Rochester, Marion, Cascade Townships, and the west half of Haverhill. I'm not sure why that's not moving. There we go. This slide is an attempt to make an apples to apples comparison based on the call types. We don't do medicals or lift assists inside the township, so we remove those from our city calls. So on the left, you'll see the city of Rochester in 23, our population, the calls for service, and the calls per 1,000 population as compared to the townships. Another slide to show response time comparisons. We're just looking at the big 3 we call it, the motor vehicle accident with injuries, fire alarms, and structure fires, comparing the response times inside the city limits versus inside each of the 4 townships. Just to give you an idea. Moving on to budget. The fire department budget over the last 10 years has grown on average 4.72% per year. In addition to the 4.75% increase, we also put tax dollars in a CIP. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the fire department CIP over the last 9 years. The current contract, or the existing contract as it stands today, it's based on one of 2 options. The formula method on the left or the percentage model on the right. The percentage model is 4%, and whichever is cheaper, both numbers are figured out every year, and whichever is cheaper is what gets charged to the townships. Of note, since 2017, 4% increase has been the cheaper option. We have not used the formula method since 2016. Current proposed contract changes to what's already in existence. We are proposing a simplified percentage approach. Instead of having the property value formula, just do a straight 4.5% year over year. And just as a note, our operational costs are estimated to increase by 6.2% in 2025. Put it into context.
I just think it's also important to point out that that's not necessarily what we would always see. We did just complete a labor contract with fire, and you might recall from your budget that was larger than would be typical.
Right. The current contract just says that Rochester Fire will offer fire protection services to the townships. That's all it says, and it's been written that way since 2005. We and the preceding 2 fire chiefs, we've always interpreted that to mean what only RFD can do. So we don't do just fires. It's just what if the fire department's the only agency that can do it. We've been going on those calls since 2005. So for this contract, we're trying to be more specific on the services that we'll provide. And up there listed, those are the items that we're offering to provide. These are services that we already provide. And we also were the only agencies that could provide those services. Growth coordination, kind of a throwback to your previous presentation. You might remember back when the school district proposed building a school in Hart Farms to the southwest. That move did not, RFD strategic plan, we could not support that. We had not put any plans into place on how we're gonna support growth to the southwest. I bring that up for an example of why this coordination for growth is important, not only for sewers, but also for the fire department. Bottom line is RFD must be able to anticipate growth areas because of the impact on our response time and our ISO rating for the entire city. Additionally, we require long lead times to prepare for major response model changes. We're expensive, fire station locations, fire stations are expensive, fire trucks, people, et cetera. And to plan for those is important. So that's why the growth coordination is important to me as the fire chief. This is the section that's gotten a lot of the attention. Ryan Yetzer's been involved and can speak to these this section in detail. And I'm happy to pass it off to him, pending your
What do you
questions.
mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, having lived in a township at one point in my life, I know my insurance went up because there wasn't water accessibility for fire trucks, which means you have to bring in pumpers, right? Trucks with fire. Have we talked about, or I'm sure you've thought about it, as we continue to grow and go into places that we haven't planned, will it mean we need more? Will they need to be in places that are more accessible in order to protect the people that live in the area that you'll have to go to if it continues to grow? I mean, I just know that was a huge issue as a resident living in a township, is making sure you had enough water, the times are important, of course, but also the pumper trucks. Thank you.
Correct. It's very complex also. Your ISO rating is based on distance from the nearest fire station, road miles, as well as distance to a hydrant. And so the our water supply is half of an ISO rating is based on the water supply. We have a very robust water supply inside the city of Rochester. And as you leave, then that lacks and the ISO rating goes down correspondingly because of distance to water. So there's the response time of us getting there is one factor that the townships will be weighing. It's already a given that we're gonna have to haul our water, bring water with us. Because it just won't be a hydrant area for the most part. But unfortunately, it's impossible to give you one exact uniform answer for everybody because every insurance company uses that information differently.
Councilmember Palmer has a question, comment?
Yes, sir.
So if you have a volunteer fire department versus a full-time fire department that we have, there's a cost, kind of going back to what the mayor's saying, there's a cost difference there to the homeowner. Is it double, 4 times the amount, or do you have a rough estimate what that would be?
The cost to the homeowner. I'm not sure I'm following you. A paid fire department is very expensive as you can see.
It's an investment.
It's an investment, right? We have very fast response times. We can get there with a lot of people in a very short period of time. That's an advantage to us. We have had citizens in townships petition to get more support from Rochester Fire because we can get there faster in some areas. That's not to diminish the work of our surrounding partners. They do great work. But these distances are great and we have the advantage of not having to respond to the station. We get the call and out we go. I don't know if I got close to answering your question.
Well, I guess I'm looking for a dollar amount to say, yes, it costs you money to have the city of Rochester provide fire service for you. But if you didn't have that, you'd be using one of the smaller cities with their volunteers, and there's a cost to that. So our 4% cost is 4%, or 4.5.
The cost could be an insurance, depending on the company, but the cost more likely would be, at least for part of the covered area, response time would be longer.
Well, I had a house up north with volunteer fire department. We just assumed that the house would burn down before they got there. That just was my experience that we had, so.
And in some cases, it doesn't matter what department it is, paid or volunteer or paid on call. When the distances become too great, nobody's gonna win that one.
And there continue to be costs for the station and the vehicles and all of the supplies required to respond to fires, even if you're not paying for the
Correct.
personnel. Okay.
So one last question before Mr. Yester comes up, and I don't know the answer, so was this brought up prior to the last discussion that we had about the county zoning? Were you working with the fire department ahead of that other issue?
We started negotiations this summer. I started reaching out to the townships that we need to start talking about the fire protection contract because of the impending expiration date coming up.
Okay, so like in the contract number 4 is about the fire department, it's not about zoning. That's my understanding.
Correct. I spoke to each of the township boards individually, or in some cases, a portion of the boards. In some cases, it was the entire board. It was at a board meeting. Other cases, it was a subcommittee. And that's where we began discussing, floating the idea of a 4.5% increase instead of the formula. That was long before this zoning thing raised its head.
And just to point out, none of this conversation is about zoning. It's about growth and development.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And if I can add one thing to that, I would just say, Chief and I have worked on this growth management conversation ever since the Hart Farm School District conversation. I mean, that was one that Chief and I worked closely together on and have been talking ever since of how can we avoid repeating that situation. So as Chief Kurska pointed out, this is the section that has gotten a lot of attention, and similar to the comments I'll make on the last one, I'll make similar comments here. This is an unfortunate one that has taken its own direction, one that we wish it would not have. And that again, I will own any responsibility that I have in that part. That being said, there are true costs to decisions that are made in the townships and how that impacts the cost of this service that we are agreeing potentially to provide for 10 years. And so the point of this section was really to sort of reinforce the conversation that was already going on about how do we work together in ensuring that these decisions are made not in a vacuum, and ensuring that, you know, the school district hadn't gone to Rochester Township to talk about the Hart Farm site before we were even brought into the conversation, or those sorts of things. That's where this section was born. And I will very humbly say, like, I never intended for the conversation to get to this point of, well, the city's trying to undercut the county in these decisions. And it's unfortunate that it's got there. I feel very badly about that. But at the end of the day, this is an important conversation about providing a service and the cost that growth decisions have on that service. And so I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to say that. So just to finish this presentation up, just some policy considerations. Now, I will note, in the last week or two, I have had positive conversations with a handful of township representatives from various different townships. And I am hopeful that we can have a path forward on this, either and potentially totally different language than what I put on the slide. Never were we intending to say this is what you have to agree to when it comes to the language. I had always been seeking feedback, and I've started to get some of that feedback, and we feel like we're headed in a direction that can be positive. Of course, looking for your feedback on these items. First and foremost, the term and length, and I don't know that we need to go into great discussion on these, but I wanted to put them out there of things to think about if we can't come to an agreement that we feel like makes sense. Maybe it's changing the term, maybe it's adjusting the percentage increase. I will note the 4.5% increase is something we've floated out. I will note at least one of the townships has formally sent us a letter saying they will not agree to anything above a 4% increase. And we know that our costs incur more than 4.7% each year. So that's something for you folks to think about. I have tried to communicate that, you know, coordination on these growth decisions has a non-monetary value that I think I can help the council understand. Unfortunately, that narrative maybe got twisted a bit. Infrastructure, should the city continue to make these infrastructure investments, in this case in fire stations, fire engines, et cetera, without any jurisdiction over those decisions that are being made to increase those costs. Again, I don't need to go through these point by point, but these were just intended to put out there to sort of frame the conversation. I'm happy to come back to them. Options moving forward. So we are set with a contract for 2025. The townships are in a contract with us through 2025. Nobody has notified either side that we have any intent to get out of that contract. If we were to go that route, we would need to notify at least 90 days ahead of doing that. We've not done that. We don't intend to. But we do need to come to some sort of agreement so that the townships can set their 2026 and beyond budget. And that's really what drove the timing of this. The townships, Chief Kurska can speak to this better, as they were having conversations prior, that they would prefer to have this information sooner rather than later so they can set their budgets. However, it's clear that that's maybe not coming to fruition just yet, and that's okay. I don't think there's necessarily huge urgency behind this. We can make sure we have discussions and that everybody is comfortable with it. Another option is to adjust the time frame if we don't have confidence. These things take time to build. So maybe we do a 2-year agreement because we're not confident and we don't feel like we have jurisdiction in these areas. Maybe it's adjusting the way that we charge for this service. For example, you could do a property value, you could remove the flat fee increase and do a property value increase. That way it would recognize, let's say a township does add 100 houses in a year, all of a sudden their property values will go up and then they would pay for the service that they are asking to be provided. Or if they added a commercial industry or whatever, that would be an option rather than a flat 4% increase. I will note, as if you go back to that slide, you will see that gap in building value is growing, and I don't foresee it going back the other way. Property values are exceeding that 4% rate. Or maybe it's some combination of these things. And so again, similar to the last item, looking for your guys' feedback on things that we have that are in the proposed contract, things that you would prefer we add or remove or stay open to or whatever. And I just want to underscore, this is a fluid conversation and we are continuing to engage in the township or with the townships, and I'm hopeful we can find some resolution. So I'm looking for your feedback. We'll take your feedback, go back and meet with the townships and likely bring a new contract forward, hopefully in Q1 of 2025 is certainly our goal. Again, nothing forcing that, but that would still be the goal.
Mr. Yetzer, could you describe how, I don't want to intermingle the two issues too much, but if the county's amendment passes as proposed to the GLUP, how do you connect that to this?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, and this is one that I wish they weren't going on the same time, because then they do get so linked, and that's not necessarily the intent. But the reality is that the city, if the land use plan amendment moves forward, the city has no authority in what happens outside of city limits. And you're now being asked to enter into a 10-year contract to serve areas where you have no authority in what happens there. And so if that were to happen, then I think you need to think about your options with this contract. If that doesn't happen, then you can think about your options the other way. Maybe this language isn't needed anymore. Maybe it's a much lesser statement that just says, let's work together. Maybe it's a flat fee instead of a building. There's lots of ways you could go with it. They are separate issues. Unfortunately, because of the timing, they're being connected, but they are separate issues.
But again, in the GLUP, there's all that language around cooperating on growth management already. So that's already the expectation. Can you just help me understand why there's pushback, or where how it's not, where the gap is in understanding the connection, I guess?
Again, I think the unfortunate thing, and that I will own in part, is that this has been sort of twisted into the city's trying to strong arm or however you want to classify that. And so I think that that's the disconnect more than anything else. The other thing I will say is, this is a contract between the city and the townships, and that is the county's general land use plan. And so while there is great language in there, neither of those things are necessarily apples to apples applicable to the city or the township. So this was just another way to sort of solidify the let's work together on these decisions.
Okay, so I hear a couple things that, one of which is important, is that the townships are trying to figure out where they continue to have power and authority. And so having an opportunity to find language that continues to meet that need and expectation that they're representing their constituents at the same time we're representing ours. So that language cooperation does seem helpful from my perspective, even if it does have to be more narrowly defined, specific to fire instead of sort of growth management in general, because it is one specific service we provide in our urban service area, correct?
Absolutely. Like going back to the last conversation, there's several utilities that we're talking about infrastructure planning for, and fire is just one of those.
Yep.
So yeah, tweaking this language to say more fire specific, all fair game. And I've been asking very pointedly for the township to point to the areas where they're uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And so that's where some of that conversation is coming.
Okay, that's good news.
And could I just add on some of the timing? We're also looking at a lot happening in the next 10 years. Like not just in the city of Rochester. There could be additional development, not in the city of Rochester, more requests for different types of interim development, things of that nature. And so it might be also helpful for Chief Kurska to speak to. There are specific things that you generally see that the fire department comments on about growth and development. And certainly we wouldn't want to be putting a future fire chief or the current one in a situation feeling uncomfortable that they could meet the terms of a contract or that their people would feel unsafe about turnarounds, width of road,
Yeah.
ingress,
and I think
egress.
That's what I'm trying to get at. It seems like there's specific pieces that we could come to an agreement about because of the relationship specific to fire. That of course is in our interest related to how we're growing, but it also just keeps it very tight. So anyway, if you wanted to comment on that as well.
Well, one of the reasons I like the current language in the contract is about we can withdraw from this contract with 90 days notice. Every time a fire resource leaves the city of Rochester to support anybody, could be the townships, could be the state, one of the hazmat team, the structural collapse team, that's some risk involved for the city of Rochester. We've got limited resources.
Yeah.
Currently, I feel relatively comfortable that the amount of time we spend outside the city limits is manageable, that we can deal with it. However, if things were to change and we start getting called at a larger, more often, now we're leaving the city uncovered. Or we're leaving the crew or two or three that are still here, not necessarily safe because they've got no backup. So there's lots of concerns. Currently, I'm comfortable with it, but in the future that could change. And we may have to pull out of this contract just because we can't cover the city, perhaps.
Yeah.
So putting that there helps to try to start that conversation because for a township to build a volunteer fire department or to work on a new contract with someone else or to take on longer response times from another provider would be something they need time to plan for. They can't flip it around any faster than we can.
So that's what I was trying to get at, that there's, even though it seems a little bit disconnected, there are some really specific examples that tie how our townships are developing to fire specifically.
Right.
So if we can focus on that in the contract, that's what I feel like is the avenue forward based on my understanding, but I'm interested in my colleagues' perspectives too. So Councilmember Wall, go ahead.
This may be an unanswerable or unfair question, and if so, please dismiss it. A $300,000 house in the city, a $300,000 house in the township, who is subsidizing whom in fire protection?
Very good question, sir. A couple years ago, Councilmember Keen and I and Holly spent some time going over the numbers. And what we learned was that the township resident paid slightly less than a citizen of or resident of Rochester, a taxpayer in Rochester. We've been searching for that dollar figure and we can't find it. It was a relatively low difference.
Okay.
I felt comfortable with it because they're getting somewhat less service. It takes us longer to get out there. We don't provide EMS. We don't provide lift assist. So it didn't feel too far off. And at the time, not to speak for you, Councilmember Keen, but you seemed satisfied with the difference at the time, or that was my takeaway, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah. I, again, Chief Kurska and I have discussed this before. I think it's back to about 2021. But I do have some concerns, but let me just ask a couple of, I mean, I'm reading that divergence of the formula versus the 4%. Over the 10 years, it diverged about $400,000. Is there anything you'd look at that and says, yep, that we probably are being underpaid on that? Or do you just look at that and say, that's just how the numbers came out?
Please do.
I'll just say, I think the answer that jumps to my mind is that since that time, and you can go back and look, our costs have raised 4.7% on average, some years more, some years less. And so meanwhile, the townships have paid a flat 4%. So while we've not done that exercise in a number of years, that gap has likely continued to grow. So if they were paying slightly more 3 years ago or 4 years ago, or whatever you just said, that gap has likely increased probably, what, if it was 4 years ago, probably 2.4% or whatever, 2.2%. So that gap continues to grow based on the model that we're in. It's part of why we suggested a 4.5%. To be frank, that probably alone doesn't eat up the gap, but we saw value in coordination and the growth as well.
Let me go slightly different, because I do want to end with this. Like, what other, like, I know Red Wing provides coverage for surrounding areas. What are there, like, industry standards that we really use this method, and this is one of the methods we've chosen? Because even the 4%, I have trouble buying into it, because I don't know what it was based on in 2005 or 2015 where it came from. But I'm trying to understand, because I am not convinced that the cities aren't subsidizing the fire service, but I don't want to go there without understanding these other kinds of things. Are there other methods, or is everybody just pick a number and then escalate it some percent?
I'm unaware of a standard. As I speak to the fire chiefs throughout southeastern Minnesota, I meet with them monthly, Southeast Chiefs, we call it. We get together and talk about issues like this and ask each other how we handle these different things. And not too many months ago, one of the questions was, how do you do fire service contracts? And what I learned is that there's not a single fire department in southeast Minnesota that does it the same.
Okay.
They're all different. For me, the fire department, I'm not trying to make this sound like I'm trying to wash my hands. The fire department's never been involved with this.
Right.
Historically. This has always been outside the fire department, and here's your budget. Here's what here's your money, chief, and go with it. And then I meet with they're one of my customers, so we meet with them as needed to listen to their concerns about the services that we provide. From my perspective, as somebody that has to live within a budget, it's a number that we need to come up with a formula to come up with that number, whatever that is. But that's just my perspective.
Okay, all right, no.
So I've never been involved with.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because when we met before, we were meeting with a finance person and talking about all the other implications from this. So this is more for maybe, I want to understand the logic when you say a township would say, we are not going over 4%. They must have some feel that the value they get, or where does that come from? Because that they can start out with that idea of like, it can't be over that. I don't understand the logic they're applying there.
I cannot say that I've had significant conversation other than that at least one member of that township felt that a 4% annual increase of a budget is more than enough, and that we should work to stay within that 4%. And that the fact that we're not, they shouldn't have to pay more for that purpose. Outside, that was more through conversation. In the letter they provided, talking about not exceeding 4%, there was not a whole lot of rationale provided with that. It was more of a statement.
Okay, so that brings me back to this thing. Councilmember Wall asked about that house-to-house comparison, but without any sort of metric like that talks about, the $300,000 house in Rochester, what they pay versus something. And I would tend to agree with you that it's not going to be the same amount because the service is different. But I have become convinced that the city is subsidizing the growth in the townships by providing what we consider to be a high professional, like responsive service at a subsidized cost. If I look at property values going up from 2015 to 2025 and think of what the taxes being paid by a house in Rochester are, and then look at this in a township, I look at that and say that can't possibly cover it. The other thing I heard when I talked about that equity is someone told me that 17% of a Rochester taxpayer's bill goes to fire, and so does 17% of a township's. But that again doesn't make sense to me, because their bills are so dramatically lower than ours that it means they're probably being subsidized. I don't feel the need that this has got to be resolved right now, but I think over time we should be able to do this, and not so much just from we're starting from some number which we never understood and just increment it without knowing these things. Councilmember Palmer tried to go on the ISO thing, but I also think this is something that if we could do that sort of equity across homes, which we don't seem to be able to get to, it would help me understand that this is equitable, and we're not overcharging. I know from the fire department, this is extra money into the budget and they consider that to be good. You showed us the response numbers and they call less, things like that. But I still look at this and say, fire service isn't a for-fee service. This is like buying the big insurance policy. And I think we're giving it to them for very less than what we're paying for it ourselves and just allowing them to almost justify it based on we only made this many calls. I think I haven't made a call in 40 years in my house, but I don't think my fire payments have been wasted. That's important to my well-being that we're doing those all the time. It's not just a fee for service. So I do have some concerns with this. I don't have 1 year, 2 year concerns with it. I have this concern that we should have equitable distribution. I hope that decisions like this people don't make decisions to live on the edge of town where they pay less taxes, where they can use the roads, they can use the economy, they can use the fire department, but they don't have to pay the Rochester taxes. I hope that doesn't start. I don't have a clear view that that's what's going on, but I do worry about if we're just happy with getting any sort of money, we're going to end up getting people demanding that we do stuff for 4% or less, no matter what it costs us. And I don't like to see that happen.
Councilmember Dennis?
Okay, thank you. So this comment, this thought is not to justify subsidizing, but just to put it out there that when we talk about potentially subsidizing townships or small areas, to my knowledge, or to my recollection, doesn't businesses, let's say we'll use a large business in town, Mayo Clinic wasn't that said that they have a disproportionate number of call responses? I mean, there's the fire department, we respond to city taxpayers across city, go and help out Mayo Clinic at a higher rate than other areas of Rochester. Is that correct? Just want to make sure
We have evidence. It's not necessarily ironclad evidence. We have evidence to point that the Mayo Clinic visitors access 911 at a higher percentage than residents.
Okay, so just want to put that in perspective. The Mayo visitors utilize our police force. I'm sorry, fire department. So sorry, fire department.
The
at
EMS,
a higher,
the EMS specifically.
Yeah, at a higher rate than the taxpayers of Rochester. So just want to put that into thought when we are looking at what is subsidizing and what is not. Thank you for that. And I know this is very complicated with the contracts, and budgeting. Just, I guess maybe has there been talk about the county? Are their funds able to be used for any of this? I don't know how legislative works with the distribution of the county versus city. Can they take some of the burden? If it's in the county, outside of city limits?
Not to my knowledge. That would be a totally different governing system for the, fire departments in the county, which could be done. It's done in other parts of the country. Currently, the system that we have in this county is the governing body, whether that be the city council or the town board, either operates or contracts with a fire department to provide that service. And that's another one of my other concerns is not to sound too bleeding heart with you, but these are our neighbors. If they didn't have us, they'd be getting help from a really long ways away, and that concerns me also. And their firefighters.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings me to my last little thought here. You mentioned this doesn't include EMS services, but there are, I'm sure, situations where you come and you have to perform EMS services, which is wonderful.
We do, not to interrupt you, ma'am, but we do EMS and lift assist, mutual aid only. And what that normally looks like is the sheriff's deputy arrives on scene and then asks for mutual aid from us to do it. So we do EMS and lift assist, but it's relatively rare and only when asked from the first responder.
Oh, so if you were
we're not dispatched. We're not dispatched.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I mean, if you go for a fire and then a need for EMS occurs, you know,
Okay.
during that situation. Is that billed or is that just part of the fire?
No bills.
No bills, okay. All right, I mean, I just want to say thank you. Of course, that would be an incredible need for, you know, for help for people who are there. So I just was curious on how that works. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick?
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for everything you do for our community and for sharing your burden with our neighbors. You said it very, very well. I am of the mindset that we need to cover our expenses at all times. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to share with our neighbors, but as resources are finite, they become more expensive in the future. I lean towards the contract that we have now, keeping it as short as possible and keeping with the wording that we have, that you've presented to us. It's about helping our neighbors, but it's also making sure that our needs are met first. And new moms have a little saying that goes around, and it's, you know, you've got to take care of yourself first so you can be there for your child. And I feel like that's a bit what we're doing here. As the largest community in our county, we owe it to our neighbors to serve them, but we also need to make sure that we take care of ourselves first. And you laid that out really specifically. When our units leave town, that may make us more vulnerable depending upon what situations arise. And of course, the county and the state have policing that goes throughout our county, the highway department, the deputy sheriffs, and then RPD within our city. But fires don't have that. We have volunteer fire departments. We have very small municipal fire departments, and then we have our large fire department that serves our municipality. So I don't know if we will be voting on this or if this is going to the next council or not, but I like what we've laid out here. Yeah. So thank you. I couldn't.
I know, good news. All right, any final comments or discussion or comments from either of you, Chief Kurska or Mr. Yetzer? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I will turn it over to City Administrator to go over our study session schedule. Oh, this was our last study session.
This is your last study session, but for some people in our audience or watching from afar, we did put in the tentative study session schedule. Then I think it's the next slide, or the next, not slide, next part of the packet. The slotted times for the approved calendar for 2025, and then some additional information about other meetings that may come, that we're working on scheduling the study session calendar. Obviously, there are a number of different dates that still have a significant amount of time left, and we are continuing to work on that. But for those that are interested, we do have some slots. The next one will be on January 15th. And doing some training and updates on city council governance with our partners at Tierney and Whitmore. So you can decide, you can watch from home if you really want to.
All right. Do you have a question about study sessions?
No, I just want to say thanks for leaving this bank of lights off. I thought it was going to be enough, but it wasn't. I had to put my visor on, but really,
Almost made it.
I almost made it. I almost made it. So I'm sure Mayor Norton appreciated the lower light levels, but
And I have no idea why that happened. So you're
I like
welcome.
it. It's really nice. Thank you
Nice
for
that-
whoever left those off.
Third to last meeting, it came around.
Yeah, if we could shut a lot more off for the next two meetings, I'd love it.
All right, thanks, everyone. We'll see
Thank
you
you.
next Monday.